Hi everyone, welcome to Priority Zero, a lead dev engineering leadership podcast. I'm Scott Carey and I'm your host today, and I'm joined by Allison Malloy. Allison is a director of engineering at Shopify. She is born and raised in Canada. She works remotely from Canada. Allison, thanks so much for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Scott. It's going to be fun.
Great. So tell us a little bit about where you got that spark for software engineering. You've obviously had now a 20 plus year career in the software industry, but where did it all start?
I have. So as a child, and this is probably familiar for engineers, but I really wanted to be an astronaut.
Nice. It's a common career path.
It is. And that stuck with me through my high school years. And I focused a lot on math and science. And then I decided I wanted to go to engineering so that I could pursue that path. And fun fact, I guess, while I was in university, a female Canadian astronaut went to space and actually sent me an email because of some connections, and that just further sparked my interest. But unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to do that. And I did apply to our Canadian astronaut program in 2008 when they opened it to the public. But by then, I was already a software developer, and that was my career.
Nice. So where did that first kind of touch of software come from?
Yeah. So I guess even back in my very early, just started university days was when I first started doing real software with HTML and making web pages back in the late 90s, the early days of websites. And I guess even in high school, we had, those little robotic, it was a turtle, I guess, at the time that you could control. And that was the initial stuff. But it was the 90s. There wasn't that much actual computing going on, and it certainly wasn't accessible.
What was the first site you had to code?
The first site I had to code? So I got a job working for a place called the Canadian Safety Council, and I made the website for them. So it was a summer job I had as a teenager. And then after that, other sites, I worked at the Central Canada, what is it called? Central Canada Exhibition in Ottawa. So it's fair. And it was an annual fair, and I worked there for many summers as sitting in the info booth, telling people where the washrooms were, what the fun things were. And there, I started working there for the whole summer, and I ran their website also for a number of years. And I would also cold call people and say, hey, do you want to buy some advertising space on this website? And they're like, what is a website?
Yeah. It's funny, I've spoken to quite a few people who started their career at that time in software, and there does tend to be this kind of split between doing coding and then doing some sales. There'll be a lot of people that would be, talking to clients, and then basically someone would promise something that could happen on the site, and then you as the engineer are sat there being there's no way we can do that. But yeah, you just smile and you just get on with it, and then you go and do it.
Yeah. Well, funnily, actually, you say that because later in my career, I fully went into that sales support role after about a decade of working behind the scenes and on projects. And yeah, that was a great turning point in adventure.
Do you think that helps you as an engineer, having that connectivity?
Absolutely. I think it's helped me in my role, which I guess part of which is being an engineer. I think it helps me in being an engineering leader, or caring about product and caring about customers, and not being shy to have that voice to speak about UX and product.
Yeah, from a point of authority.
Yeah, maybe. Or at least knowing to come at it from the customer's point of view and not just always from the technical point of view. So trying to bridge the gap.
Yeah. And at what point did you realize that this was the career path for you?
I never looked back. I don't think I had a lot of those oh, should I do this moments? So yeah, I just did.
Just kept looking for that next job, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what was the moment where you felt like you might have made it?
Oh, I don't know. Did we ever have that moment? I'll let you know.
There must have been a moment where you're oh, I'm a software developer now.
I think even really early on, maybe. So my very first job when I was out of school, I lasted 4 whole months, and then the bust happened in early 2000, so 2000, 2001. And so I had my first layoff experience there within 4 months. And then after that, I started a different job at a defense company. And I guess I felt this is the job for me pretty early on in that career, because I felt I was able to contribute to the team. And I did have contact with customers even back then. And I was able to say, no, we should pivot what you think you want into this thing that is more of a system solution. And this is how we'll code it up. And I think even in the very early days, I was oh yeah, I can add value.
Yeah. Did that, working at a defense company, did that kind of scratch the itch of the astronaut still in there somewhere?
Yeah, a little bit. I think not right away because it was very much like system solutions. Like I was working on data distribution products. Like it was really down in the bowels of the system. But later on in years, when I was working more on drones and integrating drones and command and control systems, that was closer. And integrating satellite feeds into our systems, it got me a little closer to that space.
So where did you end up specializing when you were more of an individual contributor?
So I guess my first 15 years of career in that aerospace and defense world, I was really working as a system integrator.
Yeah.
And so it was taking data feeds from all sorts of whatever we had out there from whatever contract we were working on and integrating them into a command and control system was basically what we did. And so I guess was what my first specialty was. So being able to read the different specs and then get the data and make sense of it. And the product that I worked on for about 10 years, or rather that my company built, was a graphics like mapping SDK. And so we built systems on top of that. So being able to put lots of like fast moving objects and very accurately on a map and integrating that into like tank systems or vessel monitoring systems or radar systems, all sorts of different things. And then later that was more drones and more drones and more drones. And all of a sudden I became a drone expert.
Yeah. That definitely puts like the emphasis on the engineering part of software engineering by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it was great. I think now, looking back, I work with, we all do. I think as engineers, we work with a lot of computer science folks or engineers who have different degrees. My original degree was in electrical engineering, and I'm not a good electrical engineer. But so software, I think, is so versatile. And I think what I bring is I really do have a systems thinking background and talent. And it's fun to see how that can match with other people who are much deeper on like the CS theory than I am.
Yeah. And you're now at the director level. So like at what point did you realize you wanted to go on that management track?
Yeah, it's a funny question. I get that asked kind of often and kind of the same. I don't think I ever did. So even back when I was working at the exhibition that I mentioned before, I was leading teams of people. They weren't developers back then, but I was already managing. And then when I went into that role, in the first role at the defense company, I've been working in like a small squad of about 4 or something. I would always be the voice of the team, and it just was natural.
This happens so much in these conversations I have where it's like the kind of unintentional manager where basically I can't quite figure out whether it's because that person is predisposed to that role and they just kind of end up filling that vacuum. Like we also hear a lot of like it being spotted by people and you just kind of like without even noticing kind of get pushed into that role and then you end up being the tech lead and then you end up going into management.
Yep.
It seems like that's a much more common route in the people I get on this podcast at least than the other one, which is where people kind of like hit the ceiling and they're like, oh, I guess I have to go over to management, which I don't think is a nice way to get into management. I think your way is a bit more organic.
Yeah, I do. And I actually really hope that the second way you just described is not something that we continue to hear about. I hope that goes away because I think as an industry, and certainly at Shopify, we're really trying to make sure that there is room for people to have a full, long, and happy career as an individual contributor and not be a manager who doesn't actually want to be a manager, because we want our managers to care about the people. That's a huge part of the job.
Yeah, I think like that's a real privilege at a company like Shopify. And I think that like it's an ambition everyone should have, that you have like very even IC and management tracks. The problem I tend to like hear a lot is that like at most companies, the IC track is just smaller. And so if it exists, there is a way to get to principal and distinguished. But there's fewer of those roles around management and people start to just do the maths and they're just like, oh, it's... is there any way you found to like mitigate that? Beyond just scaling wildly.
Right. So I think a couple things. One thing that we're trying to do right now is that managers should have what we're calling a co-processor. Mm-hmm. So basically a manager should have an IC counterpart so that first of all, managers don't have to be so overloaded that they're expected to be the technical lead of all of the initiatives all the time. We should be able to have somebody else. And it's a really great partnership to bounce ideas off each other. Then the person who's more into the weeds can stay there. There's the person who wants to deal with the different tasks related to organization can focus on that too. And I hope that we will see that continue to help with that parity in numbers. And so it will be different. I think the other thing that comes to mind is I love to celebrate the technical managers who are the opposite of that, who do both. In a lot of smaller companies, and I worked at smaller companies too, there's a need for that. And maintaining that technical expertise, even though you're managing people, should be very much celebrated and fostered in people. And I think having done that is one of the things that's helped me in my career too.
Yeah, like the rise of the staff plus engineers, really like starting to get into that, right? That's you're kind of implicitly leading, but you're still like technically astute. You might be able to move across teams as you develop that expertise.
Yeah, and hopefully in smaller companies, like the other people who were not necessarily the engineers, like working at startups where we had HR people because you need them, but the teams aren't actually as big. So maybe they have more bandwidth to do some of kind of the adjacent managerial work and offload some of the technical manager from having to do those things and be a really great sounding board so it's not as challenging.
Yeah. So as you kind of naturally progress through those roles, you kind of found yourself in those roles, then that probably like coalesced into actual management roles. But what did you find the most challenging about that? Because it's obviously interesting because you're kind of like, you never probably take a step back to be like, I'm now a manager, because you've been just kind of like doing it. But was there any point where you were just like, oh, I feel ill-equipped for this situation?
Yeah. I mean, I think we all feel that at different periods. I think there's different stages that definitely come to mind. So I do recall when I made the transition from a team lead and participating and giving feedback about people and doing the tasking and different things, but not being their explicit manager, to becoming the manager and actually doing the performance reviews and those things. And I remember that transition quite vividly, actually, the first time you do those.
Yeah.
And I think I had a great manager who was a wonderful mentor at the time, and it made it seem really easy. So that was great. I think one of the big challenges of early managers is managing somebody who's more senior than you for the first time, managing somebody who's your friend for the first time.
It's so tough.
Yeah. So there's definitely like a gates almost of going through the evolution of becoming a manager and then managing would-be managers, obviously performance management challenges and that. Those, I don't think of those as much as gates because I think it's just continual forever growth that's a manager. Like even if you've done it, it's never easy.
I've got to do the managing peers thing, and then I've got to do the like coming into a company and managing a new team thing. Yes. I've never done the managing someone more senior than me thing. But like for me, like the dropping into a new team much easier than managing peers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for me it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one, even back in my high school managing the team of people days, I was managing a team of people who had been equivalent to me, and so it wasn't in tech. But I at least had that experience really, really early in my career. And one of my university summer jobs was actually a government job. And I came in and I was a high school student and or maybe I was university. And then we had master's students, but the lead who was there was going on leave. And she asked if I would step in and lead the team. So I, again, had that like experience of managing more senior people than me really early days.
Useful.
Yeah. I guess in retrospect, it was useful.
And how about the step to managing managers? You're obviously a director role now. When did that happen and how was that transition for you?
Yeah, when did that happen? So that happened, at least 10 years ago, I suppose, in my career. So several companies ago. And I think it was at the same company that I mentioned where I had the great manager mentor who became my peer. And then I took on bigger responsibilities, bigger teams, and that just organically started to include other technical leads who then themselves went through that transition to manager. So nothing of those transitions to me were not jarring. There wasn't just a one day when I woke up and it was different. On the other hand, my transition to managing directors from being a relatively new director was a one day, here's an opportunity, come and jump in this role. Yeah. And so that was just a couple of years ago. And that was really interesting experience because that was very new. I'm like, oh, now it was I came into a the role that I'm in currently. And there was already a director managing a director. And the director I became the manager of had been a director longer than I had. And so imposter syndrome central. But, yeah.
And what was the biggest kind of like shift, do you think, from going from being a manager to a manager of managers?
It's the letting go. And I mean, I guess I'm a bit of a control freak person. And so I really like to understand things. I'm also very curious. So sometimes my curiosity used to come across. Hopefully it doesn't these days. I try to be mindful, but as micromanaging. And so really being mindful of letting the people have their own space and make their own decisions, and even watching them make their own mistakes. Like, I think letting somebody make some mistakes is a really important part of their own development. Yeah. But it's hard to do. Yeah,
I think that's a really fine art. I've seen managers do it really well. I've seen managers do it less well. I also don't think that, like, we often talk about managers like they're like locked in amber and they always work this way. But I think that a behavior like that can fluctuate. Like, there'll be times when it lands the way you want it to, and there'll be times when maybe that person is under higher stress and then it just lands in a different way. So you just have to like kind of try and keep as level as you can, I guess.
Yeah. I think one of the other transitions was as when people would come and they would ask for advice in talking to their reports or dealing with a situation with their reports. It took me a little while to transition from just sharing what I had done and what I thought they should do to coaching and to really prompting them to give their ideas first, and maybe sharing some anecdotes but not telling them what to do. And I think I still am conscious of that, trying to make sure I'm in one mode or the other. And I had a really great lead a couple of years ago who would ask that question of me. It was like, oh, should I be coached today or should I be like a collaborator?
Yeah. Well, that's really good level of self-awareness, but extremely useful.
Yeah, it's excellent. And so I've tried to really relay that to other folks and apply it myself. And it's been a game changer, to be honest.
You mentioned a couple of times a manager that was like a great manager to you. What made them a great manager?
Yeah, so actually these are two different people that I was talking about in these instances. I think the first one that I was thinking about, so she took me on when I was looking for a change in my career, and I think just understood what I was looking to do, which was learn new things, grow. I'd been doing the same job for a couple of years, and I was having trouble getting an internal move permitted, and so I ended up leaving the company. Yeah. But I think she just was really open and a human, and we're still really good friends. I meet with her regularly, and many years later. Yeah. So I think just being an open door, being able to provide guidance and counsel, but in a really nice way, was super helpful. The other person that I was talking, and she was super technical and had been in the company for a really long time, so I think that helped too. Yeah. Like an expert on a few different areas. That was helpful.
So you try and bring those qualities to your own management?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, definitely. I like to be friends with my reports, and I want them to be comfortable sharing things with me so that we can help each other.
Nice.
Yeah. And the other lead that I was thinking of was really interesting because he had a background as a coach, actually. So an engineering leader, a developer, a teacher, but also coach. And so that was sometimes frustrating to me because I didn't always want to be coached.
Yes. Yeah.
But a really great transition because I'd never experienced somebody with that propensity before being my manager. So that was interesting. I think I learned a lot of having somebody who was very different than me be my lead.
Yeah, I do hate that feeling of like being coached when you don't want to be coached. I think the really good coaches hide it extremely well.
Maybe, but
it's hard. Coaching's hard.
Yeah, but I think I needed it, so it was good.
That's good. So Shopify is fully remote company?
Yes, fully remote.
So you work from Ottawa in Canada. You're a director of engineering there. Have you worked in a lot of remote environments over your career?
Not really. So the job prior to joining Shopify, I was working remote part of the time. But so I was working for a company that was run out of Nevada and also had offices in LA. And so I would go there for a couple of weeks and then come home and work remotely for a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And even in the job prior to that, I was working in an office, but we worked a lot with clients or with counterparts and subcontractors who were in different countries and different offices. So I guess I'd had over my career a lot of experience working with teams who were not adjacent to me.
Yeah. But that helps. That's kind of like a good on-ramp, isn't it, to full remote working?
Yes.
Do you like working remotely?
Some of the time. I like working remotely because I obviously don't have to commute anywhere or go anywhere, but I find it is quite efficient to communicate with people and go through meetings, but I'm a very social person, and so I do miss interacting with people. And I think I'm still recovering from the COVID times when we were like hunkered down at home and couldn't see people. So now what we do at Shopify is we actually know the real importance of people getting together in person. And so we often, people will come to Ottawa because we do have an office and you can go into the office and meet there, or we fly to different cities wherever there's critical mass and we actually meet together for a few days, recharge those trust batteries and recharged for me, my like human interaction battery. And it's so important for building trust.
How do you schedule those kind of like in-person meetings? Do they kind of happen on the fly or are they really set in stone?
Yeah, there's kind of a variety actually, because not all cases would do well with one or the other.
Yeah.
So there are meetings that we plan further ahead, and we just know those tend to be bigger, broader meetings where there's lots of teams involved and lots of different people. So those ones we get a lot of notice. And then other times we try to focus on allowing teams to get together when they're at what they decide is an important time in the life cycle of the work that they're doing. So whether that's starting a project, trying to get something done, prototyping. And so sometimes you can plan those things a few weeks ahead of time, which is great. We like that because reduce travel costs and such. Yeah. But other times you just need to do it kind of at the last minute. So we can afford for that too.
Yeah, nice. And is working as a director fully remote throwing up any unique challenges?
Yeah. I think working fully remote, and especially I think as a director, you're not really in the team. You're not in any given project team. You're not in any given even part of the area teams where they create their own culture. Like I need to let the people who report to me create that with their teams. Yeah. And so the side effect of that is that the feedback loop is constrained. It's more challenging to build the feedback loop to the people who don't report directly to you that you meet all the time. And then add on to that you're remote. So you can create podcasts, videos, you can write documents, you can send notes. But how do you actually know that those have been internalized? And so there's definitely a lot more challenges when you're providing communication for a huge group of people and you can't see them all. You can't see the body language. So we definitely have to focus on making sure that there's other ways that we check in. And one of the things that I try to do and tell people to do is share over and over.
Yeah, well, this is like part of being a manager. Managers is just feeling comfortable sharing things over and over again.
Exactly. It's like, don't be offended if somebody doesn't remember or didn't understand or didn't digest or just didn't read it or watch it.
Yeah.
Do it again and do it in different mediums. I think that's something that I also try to advocate for, is like some people like to watch a video, other people don't, other people want to read it, other people need extra time, have live meetings. So yeah, I think you end up really focusing on communication, and it's constantly a challenge.
And this is the Priority Zero podcast. So we like to talk about what your biggest priority is right now. What's that thing that's like stubbornly at the top of your priority list?
Yeah, absolutely. So the major theme for 2024 for all of Shopify was unification. And the teams that I work with, we are responsible for numerous features in our area. And unfortunately, they don't all work together. And they don't always work together with the features that other teams are rolling out. And so that's definitely been a top priority and will continue to be over the next few months for my teams. And we want to make sure that our software is great, fast, high quality, enjoyable to use. And so the focus right now is absolutely on a smaller set of brand new features, but quality and performance.
So what's the approach there? Like, how do you start to kind of break that problem down?
Yeah, a few different ways. So first of all, it's really fantastic to have leadership focused on it. So it meant that as a whole company, we were able to say, okay, we are going to have less features that we're rolling out right now because we have this other focus. Yeah. And we were able to move some teams around. I'm actually in the process right now of onboarding some new folks onto our team so that we can address some of the issues that we've identified as being high priority out of that list of other high priority things, highest of the high priorities. And so now I've got to onboard these new teams, make sure they're happy, get them ramped up, and kind of spread the knowledge across the team. So all those fun things that go with onboarding folks. And I think we're slightly out of practice of doing that because we hadn't been hiring or moving people around a lot in recent years. So just making sure that we are setting these folks up for success, and that my managers who are onboarding them are set up themselves for success to do this work.
Yeah, I feel like you're in a good environment for that. Obviously, a colleague of yours is James Stanier, who writes a lot for Lead Dev. He wrote the book on remote engineering management, literally. But he wrote a piece for us a couple of years ago now about creating an onboarding plan. This was obviously in pretty much the middle of the pandemic, remote onboarding. And it's like, for me, it's just like, it should be the Bible for how people do this.
Yeah, it's amazing. And we did have to completely change how we onboard folks from before the pandemic and when we were in person to now when we are remote.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about unification, like what does that actually kind of look like as a technical problem?
Yeah, so there's a couple different parts of it. The part that I'm more focused on personally is making sure that the features that we're rolling out actually are integrated with the other features. So as a big company, we have many teams working on many features at all times. And it's pretty easy to say that something is ready and ship something that will work under a certain set of conditions. Mm-hmm. But then because something else might have been happening at the exact same time, they're not necessarily integrated together yet. And so we just really need to focus on making those things work together. We have a core set of features, but then we also have like a point of sale system, for instance. And it's not usually possible for us to roll out the initial phase of the feature for our general users at the exact same time as it is for the point of sale. So now we want to make sure that we add those feature capabilities into that part of the system. And we also have a lot of different apps and first-party apps that we support and APIs. And so it's making sure that all of these features that we've been rolling out, and maybe we want to stress test them a little bit before we do all this additional work.
Yeah.
Now it's time to do all that additional work.
So you're kind of like adding an additional requirement at the end, right? That's just like, okay, that's it. And now make sure that it integrates with X, Y, and Z.
Right. And so in Shopify, for example, our primary use case is online sales. Go to a website, buy a product. We also have features. For instance, we have a draft orders capability. So this allows a merchant in the back office to create an order on behalf of someone. And it's a separate flow. A separate flow for creating an order, and it's a different surface and it's different logic. And so when we add something to our main workflow, we have to then add it to this one, and often it's a little bit lagging too. So we're cleaning all that up.
Yeah. Yeah. And then is this mainly kind of forward looking in terms of making sure that happens now, or have you also got to go back and do all the retrospective work on all the stuff that exists already?
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a lot of retroactive things because we were really pushing hard to release a lot of new features in recent years, and we've done a great job of that. And now, we just want to make sure that we've done the work to make sure that they work performantly in all these other cases, so that all of the different merchants can make use of all the different pieces. Yeah,
I often find that getting anyone, not just engineers, to go back and like fix old stuff is often a bit of a challenge. Yeah. How do you kind of get people excited about a big priority zero like this?
Yeah, I guess I don't even think of this as going back and fixing old things, because these surface areas are in and of themselves also continuing to be developed. Yeah. So yes, some of the lines of code are actually old, but the features and the products that we're working on are not old. They're continuously developing too. So I think it's less of an issue of getting people motivated to do it and more of an issue of making sure that the right people are talking to the right other people so that it works properly together. And that's for the feature work. There are other aspects of unification, which is working on maybe the foundational components and making sure that we are actually creating a performance system. Yeah. That's a little different. That is a little more invisible work, although I think one could argue that being fast is definitely a top product focus, not just an engineering focus.
Yeah.
But sometimes we forget that we know this. We have to remind ourselves that we know this, and this is actually a fact. And so there are also lots of efforts going on to optimize things that have, kind of devolved over time. We're having lots of people add lots of features into our monolith, because Shopify is mostly a monolith, means that things have just degraded and they do need cleanup. And now we're saying, well, maybe we're not just doing cleanup and optimizations. Should we and can we completely change some of the infrastructure now that we've made some major changes to how we think about the product? And also, like, now that there's new infrastructure, there's new tools, there's different things. So this is the time where a lot of teams are evaluating what the underpinnings are and working on them. And it'll be somewhat invisible, but great changes.
Did you have to contend with any pushback when that became the big focus for the company?
No, I think everybody was really excited about it, actually. I think especially the engineering folks feel like, oh, amazing. We actually have the space to do the things that we are expected to do anyway.
Yeah.
Because we do always want to try to prioritize performance, and we do always want to clean up tech debt and product debt. But we often, I think through sort of a self-guilt of engineers doing it to ourselves, think that we have to put those things on pause to do the feature work, and maybe don't always advocate loud enough to our product counterparts that no, we actually need to reserve all this time to do things.
Yeah.
So it was really nice, I think, for everybody to say, oh, it's coming the other way. We don't have to advocate for it. We don't have to do that effort. We're being given the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, that's quite a relief, I think. Yeah. There's been I've seen a lot of kind of chatter recently about reserving capacity, 80-20 rule, the problems with the 80-20 rule. But, it's just a framework, isn't it? It's just a way to start to go after some of those things. But yeah, it must be a bit of a relief for some engineers where they're just like, I don't now have to advocate for finding that capacity.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I think for me, I've never had a problem advocating for that capacity, but I do find myself making sure that the teams advocate for that and know that they have backup, and it's actually part of their responsibility to advocate for these things and to identify when the 20% isn't going to be enough and we need to dedicate a full team to doing a longer term effort. And even if it's some of these things have to be multi-year efforts because they're so foundational.
Yeah. And I always like to ask, when will you know that that's no longer your priority zero? What needs to happen for this to drop down?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So we do have definitely a list of things that we're trying to tackle. We have some performance goals that we made up and we are striving toward it. So we are continuing to progress towards those goals. But at some point we will have to say, oh, we got this far. Are we happy with it? And is that good enough? So we kind of ask ourselves those questions all the time. And then as far as the does X work with Y, there's actually a list and we just go through the list.
Okay, nice.
That's easier. There's a checkbox. We can just check it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think comes after it? What do you think the next one is?
Oh, well, there's so many things. So Shopify is really fun because we have just a forever roadmap. Essentially, there is so much we can do. And so definitely for my teams, we have a couple-year vision that we're already working towards. And I mentioned earlier that while we are focused on quality and performance and unification right now, we also have some features that we're working on. And I have the privilege to be leading one of those. And so we have pretty big initiatives and changes coming that will change the way merchants can use our system for the years to come versus what it was before. So that's really exciting. And it's called share what it is, I guess. Yeah. So it's called Markets. And we did have the concept of markets before, which is basically if you're in Canada, you could see different prices than somebody who's in the US. We are greatly expanding that to mean all the different contexts in which buyers can come and be presented information. And so what that means is it can be wholesale versus D2C. It can be you are somebody who's at a retail store, you're somebody else, and we're creating the system within Shopify to manage that all in one place and really understand what happens as you make changes to, say, your product list, your publication list, or your prices for different people, and create audit trail and create visualizations, and just allow a ton more flexibility. We've been adding in features incrementally to support some of these use cases, but this is really a platform change that will create this framework that people can do really powerful things with. So I'm, as you can tell, pretty excited about that.
Nice. And I always like to end the show on a recommendation. So is there anything you have seen, listened to, watched recently that you want to recommend?
Yeah. So I have started listening to a podcast called Acquired.fm, and I found that one quite fascinating. So I'm excited by that. You do have to dedicate a few blocks of hours to make sure you have time to listen to the podcast.
Tell me about it.
They're great. So it's basically about a history of companies. And
I think this has been recommended before.
Oh, okay. Well, it's fantastic. I've been really enjoying them. I've only heard about it a couple months ago, and on some long drives to hockey tournaments with my children, and I make them listen to it with me.
Yeah.
Not sure they loved it, but basically we listened to one about Costco, and it was how did they create their business model? How did they come to be? How do they remain so important in our world? And another series on Microsoft, and I haven't heard the second one yet, but I'm very excited to listen to that. So that's been fun. And I just started reading a book about I think it's called The Art of Storytelling, and that's been interesting. So I'll keep reading that.
Awesome. Great recommendations. Well, Allison, thank you so much for coming on. It was really great to hear about your career and all the work you're doing at Shopify, and hope to see you again soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you again for listening to Priority Zero and Lead Dev Podcasts. Remember, you can get us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, but when you do, please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We hope to see you at the next one.